Ever walked away from something, maybe a meeting, or even just a chat and thought, could I have handled that better?
Oh, definitely. Happens all the time.
Whether it's, asking for a raise, trying to win over a new client, or heck, even figuring out where to eat dinner with friends, so much of life seems to be about, well, getting what you need, what you want.
It really does boil down to that. And often there's a skill involved that makes a huge difference.
Exactly. And what if there was this sort of like core skill, maybe even a superpower, that could genuinely boost your chances in all those situations?
You're talking about negotiation, right? The art, maybe the science of it.
That's the one.
It's way more than just being pushy, isn't it? It's this really interesting mix of understanding people, thinking strategically, and just communicating clearly.
Totally. And that is precisely what we're diving deep into today. We've kind of pulled together the key stuff from a really thorough guide on English negotiation strategies.
Like a playbook.
Yeah, think of it like that. A cheat code, maybe, to help you become a more confident, more effective negotiator. We're aiming for practical insights you can actually use.
So not getting bogged down in theory, but focusing on what works.
Right. The goal isn't to overwhelm anyone, just to unlock those core ideas that really make the difference between okay negotiators and, really great ones.
And it's interesting because our source material really points to two main ways of thinking about negotiation right from the start.
Yes, the two types.
Yeah, distributive, which can sometimes feel like you're fighting over a limited resource.
Win-lose, basically.
Kind of, yeah. And then there's integrative, which is more about finding ways to create more value so maybe everyone can win. Understanding those two approaches is like step one.
Okay, crucial first step. And our guide also mentioned something else being absolutely vital before you even start talking.
Oh, absolutely. Preparation. It's hammered home again and again.
It's like doing your homework, your recon, before a really important mission or something.
Exactly that. The more you know beforehand, the better off you'll be. It's foundational.
Okay, so let's really get into these fundamentals then. When we say negotiation, what are we defining here?
Well, the guide defines it pretty clearly. It's basically a communication process. You've got two or more sides. They have different interests, but they're trying to reach an agreement that, works well enough for everyone.
So it involves communication.
Communication, definitely. Persuasion, trying to solve problems together, and then ultimately making decisions as a group.
Makes sense. Now, you mentioned those two types. Let's start with distributive. You said it's like fighting over a limited resource.
Yeah, think of it like a pie, a fixed pie sitting on the table.
Okay, one pie, fixed size.
Exactly. And in that distributive mindset, each person sort of sees that pie and thinks, okay, how do I get the biggest possible slice for myself?
Like haggling over a used car price.
Perfect example. Or maybe arguing over the last piece of cake. It can feel a bit zero-sum, where my gain is potentially your loss.
Right, a bit of a tug-of-war. So how does the other type, integrative, how does that differ? It sounds nicer.
Huh. Well, it takes a totally different approach. Instead of just focusing on how to divide that existing pie,
You try to make it bigger.
you got it. You're looking for ways to expand the pie first. It's about collaborating, really trying to understand what the other side actually needs, not just what they're asking for, but the why behind it.
The underlying reasons.
Yeah, and building enough trust so you can explore creative solutions that might actually benefit everybody involved. Think about maybe two companies trying to form a long-term partnership.
Okay.
Their main goal isn't just to squeeze the best possible price out of each other in that moment. It's about finding ways to work together that create totally new value for both of them down the line.
So integrative seems like the ideal, the win-win everyone talks about. But is it always that clear-cut in real life? Can you
Yeah.
always just make the pie bigger?
That's a great question. Often, no. While those integrative win-win solutions are usually the best outcome if you can find them, the reality is most negotiations are a mix.
A blend of both.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
You might find yourself being a bit more distributive when you're talking about, say, the price.
The main number.
Right. But then you might shift to a much more integrative style when you discuss other things, like delivery timelines or service levels or maybe ongoing support.
So you adjust your approach depending on the specific issue.
The real skill is recognizing which approach, or maybe what combination of approaches, fits the specific situation you're in.
Okay, that makes sense. So we've got the two basic mindsets, distributive and integrative. Now let's go back to what you said is the bedrock preparation. Our guide really emphasizes this. Why is it just so darn important?
Look, the source is really clear on this. Solid preparation is, without doubt, the most critical factor for success, honestly.
More important than being charismatic or quick-witted.
Studies actually back this up. Negotiators who spend more time preparing consistently get better results. Period. If you walk in without knowing what you really need, without having thought about what the other side might want, and crucially, without knowing what your alternatives are if things go south, well, you're basically flying blind.
Yeah, you're just reacting, not planning.
Exactly. Preparation gives you clarity, it gives you confidence, it gives you a massive strategic edge.
Okay, I'm sold on preparation. So where do we start? What are the absolute must-do steps in this prep phase?
All right, there are a few key things. First up, defining your goals. Seriously, you need to know what you absolutely must have.
At the bottom of
Your
here?
walkaway point. Yeah, the point where you say, nope, this deal isn't good enough, I'm out. But you also need to define your ideal outcome. What would be a fantastic result? And maybe some secondary goals too, things that would be nice to have.
So minimum acceptable, ideal target, and maybe some stretch goals.
And be specific. Write them down. Prioritize.
Okay, goals defined. What's next?
Next is understanding interests. This is huge. It's about digging deeper than the stated position.
The position being what you want.
Exactly. Like, I want a 10% discount. That's the position. The interests are the underlying reasons why you want that.
Okay.
Maybe your interest is, I need to stay within my department's budget, or I need to show my boss I got a good deal, or maybe I feel the standard price is just too high for the value.
So the motivation behind the request.
Yes. And crucially, you also have to spend time thinking about the other party's interests. Why are they asking for what they're asking for? What might their underlying needs or pressures be? Asking why about their position is just as important as asking about your own.
That could really change how you approach things, couldn't it? If you understand why they need something.
Precisely. Because if you understand the underlying drivers on both sides, you can often find creative solutions that meet everyone's real needs, even if your starting positions seem totally incompatible.
Okay, understanding interests opens up possibilities. What else is on the prep checklist? I keep hearing about this thing called BATNA. Sounds like an acronym.
It is. BATNA stands for Best Alternative to a Negotiated Agreement.
Best alternative. Okay, so what does that actually mean?
Think of it simply as your plan B. What's the best outcome you can achieve without reaching an agreement in this specific negotiation?
So what happens if I just walk away?
Exactly. What's your best course of action then? Knowing your BTNA is incredibly powerful. It's your main source of leverage, really, and confidence.
How so?
Because it gives you a benchmark. You can look at any offer on the table and ask yourself objectively, is this better than my BTNA? If it's not, you know you can walk away and still be okay, maybe even better off.
So it stops you from taking a bad deal just because you feel pressured to agree.
Absolutely. A strong, well-understood BTNA gives you the power to say no.
Okay, an example. If I'm negotiating my salary for a new job.
Your BTNA might be staying in your current job, or maybe accepting another offer you have, or perhaps even starting your own freelance thing. It's whatever your best realistic alternative is.
Got it. And having that clearly defined gives you more power in the negotiation.
Definitely. Research shows negotiators who've clearly figured out their BTNA do significantly better.
Okay. BTNA is the safety net, the plan B. What about ZUPOA? That sounds even weirder.
Yeah, ZUPA. It stands for the Zone of Possible Agreement.
Zone of possible agreement.
Think of it as the overlap, the sweet spot, between what you're willing to accept and what the other side is likely willing to accept. It's the range between your walkaway point, sometimes called your reservation point, and what you believe their walkaway point is.
So if there is an overlap,
Then an agreement is theoretically possible within that zone. If there's no overlap, if your minimum is higher than their maximum, for instance, then there's no ZUPIA, and reaching a deal is going to be very difficult, maybe impossible, unless something changes.
okay, let's try an example. If I'm selling my bike and the absolute lowest I'll take is $200.
That's your reservation point.
Right. And I think the buyer's absolute highest they're willing to pay is probably $250.
That's your estimate of their reservation point.
Then the ZOPA is that $50 range between $200 and $250.
Exactly. And during the negotiation, your aim is to figure out as accurately as possible where that ZOPA really lies, and then try to land the final agreement somewhere within that zone that's favorable to you.
So part of preparation is trying to estimate their walkaway point. How do you do that?
Research, mostly. Thinking about their likely BATNA, what pressures they might be under, market rates, things like that. It's an educated guess, but a crucial one.
Okay, this prep phase is intense. What else needs doing?
Well, you should also be developing options and proposals. Don't just go in with one demand.
Like brainstorm different possibilities.
Yeah. Think about different ways you could structure a deal. Can you combine different terms, offer different packages, maybe trade concessions on one issue for gains on another? Having multiple options shows flexibility and helps you find creative solutions.
Like having a menu of choices instead of just one take it or leave it offer.
Exactly. And related to that, you should anticipate potential issues and objections. What challenges or pushback are they likely to raise?
And figure out how you'll respond.
Yes. Think through your counterarguments and responses in advance. It makes you feel much more prepared and less likely to be caught off guard during the actual conversation. Mentally rehearsing helps a lot.
Good tip. Anything else for prep?
Just a couple more quick ones. Plan your opening strategy. How will you start? What tone do you want? Critically, will you make the first offer?
Ah, the first offer dilemma.
Our guide suggests that if you're well prepared and you have a good sense of the likely ZOPA, making the first reasonable but ambitious offer can be very effective. It acts as an anchor. We can talk more about anchoring later.
Okay, and the last thing.
Don't forget the simple logistics. Where will you meet? When? Who needs to be there? What's the agenda? Getting these details sorted avoids confusion later.
Wow, okay. It really sounds like skipping this prep work is just setting yourself up to fail, or at least not do as well as you could.
Absolutely. If you don't prepare thoroughly, you're likely to make decisions based on gut feeling or pressure in the moment. You'll miss opportunities. You'll probably end up reacting to whatever the other side does instead of proactively guiding things towards your goals.
Right, reactive versus proactive. Okay, so we've done all this homework, we feel prepared, we walk into the room or join the call. Now what? What are the key strategies to actually use during the negotiation itself?
Okay, now we're in the thick of it. Several key strategies come into play. One we've touched on is leveraging your BATNA.
Using that plan B knowledge.
Right. Now, you generally don't want to just blurt out your BATNA right away. That can sometimes sound like a threat.
Okay, be careful with it.
But you can subtly signal that you do have other options. It reinforces that you're not desperate. And constantly, in your own mind, you're using your BATNA as that benchmark. Is the offer currently on the table better than my BTNA?
Keep checking back against it. Makes sense. What else?
Understanding and shaping the ZUOPA. Remember that zone of possible agreement. As the conversation unfolds, you're still trying to gather information to get a clearer picture of their walkaway point.
It's testing the waters.
Exactly. Asking questions, listening carefully to their responses, trying to figure out their constraints. The better you understand the potential ZUOPA, the better you can position your offers to land favorably within it.
And how do you try to influence where in the ZUOP the final deal lands, closer to your end?
That brings us to anchoring. This is a really powerful psychological effect. The very first offer put on the table often acts as an anchor, heavily influencing where the subsequent discussion goes.
The first number sort of sticks in people's minds?
Pretty much. So if you've done your homework and you're confident, making the first offer one that's ambitious but still justifiable and realistic can effectively anchor the negotiation in your favor.
But you said reasonable. What if you go too high or too low?
That's the risk. An extreme anchor, one that seems totally out of touch, can actually damage your credibility and make the other side less willing to engage seriously.
So ambitious but credible. What if they make the first offer and it's like way off?
Then you need to counter it effectively. Don't just nibble around their anchor. You should respond relatively quickly and assertively with your own well-reasoned proposal, effectively setting a counter anchor.
Okay, anchoring is about setting that initial benchmark. What about how we talk about our offers and concessions?
That's where framing comes in. It's all about how you present information. The same fact can be perceived very differently depending on how it's framed.
It's like spit, sort of, but ideally in a constructive way. For instance, instead of just saying, this will cost you X, you frame it in terms of the benefit or value they receive. This investment of X will deliver Y result for you.
Focus on their gain.
Exactly. Or when you make a concession, don't just give something away. Frame it as an investment in reaching a deal, or link it to something you need in return. You can also frame things in terms of potential loss, what they stand to lose if you don't reach an agreement. Loss aversion is a powerful motivator.
Interesting. So instead of the price is $1,000, it's more like for an investment of $1,000, you avoid the risk of X and gain the benefit of Y.
Precisely. Then there's the whole dance of strategic concessions. It's rare to get everything you want without giving anything up.
Yeah, some give and take is usually needed.
So plan your concessions before you start negotiating. Know what you might be willing to give up, and importantly, what you'd ideally want in return for each concession.
Have your trade-offs mapped out.
Yes. And generally, try not to be the first one to make a big concession on a major issue. Aim for reciprocity. If you can do X, then I can consider Y.
Exactly that structure. Also, when you do concede, do it in small steps, not big jumps. And always explain the value of what you're conceding so it's not seen as insignificant or a sign of weakness.
Make them appreciate the concession.
Right. And all through this, information management is absolute key. You need to share some information to build trust and explore those integrative win-win possibilities.
Especially about your interests, maybe.
Yes, sharing interests can be very helpful, but you need to be careful about revealing critical information too early. Things like your absolute bottom line, your walkaway point, or maybe the details of your ATNA. Hold those cards close initially,
Share strategically.
while at the same time you're actively trying to get information from them. The best way, asking open-ended questions.
Not just yes-no questions.
Right. Questions starting with what, how, why, tell me about. These encourage them to talk more, to elaborate, to reveal those underlying interests and constraints.
And while they're talking.
You need to be practicing active listening, really focusing, understanding not just the words but the meaning behind them, maybe paraphrasing to confirm you've understood. It shows respect and helps you gather crucial intelligence.
So asking good questions and actually listening to the answers. Sounds simple, but probably isn't always easy in the heat of the moment.
It takes practice. And alongside all the strategic stuff, don't forget the human element, building rapport.
Making a connection.
Yeah. Start with some polite small talk if it's culturally appropriate. Look for common ground, anything you might share outside the negotiation topic. Show respect for their position, even if you strongly disagree with it.
So be professional, be respectful.
Active listening helps here too. Just creating a more positive, trusting atmosphere can make the whole process smoother, less adversarial, especially if you're aiming for those integrative win-win outcomes.
Trust seems pretty fundamental for that.
It really is. But even in a tough distributive bargain, a bit of rapport can prevent things from getting unnecessarily hostile.
Okay, lots of strategies there. But what happens if, despite all this, you just get stuck? You hit a wall, an impasse, a deadlock. What do you do then?
Yeah, deadlocks happen. It's important not to panic. There are several things you can try.
Like what?
So just taking a break, just stepping away for 10 minutes, or even until the next day, can let heads cool and allow for fresh perspectives.
Hit the pause button.
Exactly. Or you could try changing the subject for a while. Discuss a different, maybe less contentious part of the deal to build some momentum again.
Shift focus.
You could also try introducing new information, if you have any, or brainstorming some completely new options together. Reframing the problem sometimes helps unlock things.
Find a new angle.
You can also explicitly refocus on the shared interests you do have. Remind everyone what you're both trying to achieve. Summarizing the points you've agreed on so far can also help. It shows progress hasn't completely stalled.
Build on common ground.
If the issue is really complex, maybe try breaking it down into smaller, more manageable pieces. Tackle them one by one. And if you're really truly stuck, you might consider bringing in a neutral third party.
Like a mediator.
Exactly. Someone impartial to help facilitate the conversation.
Those are really useful, practical tips for getting unstuck. Now, earlier, you hinted that negotiations tend to follow a kind of pattern, some typical stages. Could you quickly walk us through those?
Sure. It's helpful to have a mental map. Generally, you can think of it in these phases. First, obviously, is preparation. Everything we talked about doing before the actual negotiation.
The homework phase. Got it.
Then comes the opening. This is when you actually start the interaction. You build that initial rapport. You state the purpose of the negotiation, maybe agree on an agenda or how you'll proceed.
Setting the stage and the rules of engagement.
Exactly. Next is a really crucial stage, exploration. This is where you exchange information, ask those open-ended questions, and really try to understand each other's underlying interests, needs, and priorities.
The deep dive into the why.
You got it. This is where you uncover potential for those win-win solutions. After exploration comes the bargaining stage.
This sounds like the main event.
It often is. This is where you make proposals, counter-proposals, exchange concessions, and actively work towards finding a solution that bridges the gap between your starting positions.
The back and forth haggling, essentially.
It can be, yeah. Then hopefully you move into the closing stage. Here, the aim is to finalize the agreement.
Dotting the I's and crossing the T's.
Making sure everyone understands exactly what's been agreed upon, summarizing the key terms, maybe shaking hands or signing something.
Sealing the deal, is that it?
Not quite. There's
Yeah.
often a post-negotiation stage too. This is all about implementation.
Following through.
Right. Drafting the formal contract if needed, taking the agreed actions, managing the ongoing relationship. The deal isn't truly done until it's successfully implemented.
That's a really helpful framework. Preparation, opening, exploration, bargaining, closing, and post-negotiation. It helps to see the flow.
Understanding these stages helps you know what to expect and tailor your approach as you move through the process.
Okay, to make this even more concrete, could we just briefly touch on maybe one or two quick examples of these ideas in action?
Sure. Let's take that salary negotiation scenario again.
Okay.
Key strategy there is definitely anchoring. You research the market rate thoroughly, figure out your value, and then make that first offer ambitious but justifiable. You anchor high, but you're ready to explain why you deserve it based on your skills, experience, and market data.
Don't just pluck a number out of thin air.
Never. And having a strong BAT&A is critical. Maybe you have another offer, or you're happy enough in your current role. That knowledge gives you the confidence to negotiate firmly and not feel pressured to accept something below your walkaway point.
Know your worth, know your options. Powerful. What about a different context, say negotiating a business contract?
There, the focus often shifts more towards finding integrative solutions. It's about digging deep to understand the real needs behind the stated positions, which often aren't just about the price.
Looking beyond the headline number.
Exactly. Maybe one side, say the client, really needs flexible payment terms because of their cash flow cycle. The supplier, on the other hand, might need a certain volume commitment to make their production efficient.
So different underlying priorities.
Right. An integrative solution might involve adjusting the payment schedule to help the client's cash flow, in return for the client committing to a larger order volume, which helps the supplier. You're trading concessions based on different priorities to create a better deal for both, expanding that pie.
Finding those non-obvious trade-offs that unlock value. Very cool.
It really highlights the importance of that exploration stage, understanding the why.
This has been incredibly insightful. Seriously, it paints negotiation as so much more, well, strategic and thoughtful than just arguing or compromising.
It really is. And the good news is, it's absolutely a skill. It's not some innate talent. It can be learned, practiced, and improved by anyone.
That's really encouraging. So for you listening right now, maybe take a second to think about this. How can these concepts we've discussed, things like meticulous preparation, really knowing your BAT&A, understanding the ZUAPE, using anchoring smartly, knowing when to be distributive versus integrative, how could you actually start applying these in your own world?
Could be at work, could be in your personal life.
Yeah, anywhere you need to reach an agreement with someone who might see things differently.
And don't forget, communication is woven through all of this. The specific language you use, how you frame things, how actively you listen, it all matters hugely. Small tweaks in how you communicate can make a big difference to the outcome.
Absolutely. Okay, so here's a little challenge for you, something to think about after this deep dive. Look ahead. Is there a situation coming up, maybe next week, maybe next month, where you know some kind of negotiation is likely? Big or small, doesn't matter.
Could be anything. Buying a car, discussing workload with your boss, planning a vacation with family.
Right. Pick just one or two strategies we talked about today. Maybe it's really drilling down into your interests and trying to figure out theirs beforehand. Or perhaps it's deciding deliberately whether you'll make the first offer and how you'll frame it.
Then, consciously try to use those chosen strategies in that situation.
And afterwards, take 5 minutes. Reflect. How did it go? Did using that strategy seem to make a difference? What felt comfortable? What felt awkward? What did you learn?
It's that cycle of trying things out and then thinking about it afterwards that really builds the skill and makes it second nature over time.
Give it a shot. You might be surprised at how much more effectively you can navigate those conversations and ultimately get closer to the outcomes you're looking for.